I thought I knew what the devil looked like. I used to think it was the thick smell of whiskey on his breath, or the stinging slap his hand left on my cheek. But I was wrong. The real devil was a perfect dark circle, the size of a dime, hidden on the calf of my 8-year-old daughter. It wasn't a fall, it wasn't an accident, it was a cigarette burn. And in that moment, the woman who prayed for peace died. In her place, a mother willing to burn the whole world down for justice was born. That's a heavy opening, I know. And before we start today's story, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. Are you in a quiet little town or a big noisy city? Are you drinking your morning coffee or enjoying a hot evening tea? Please let me know in the comments. I love to read them and know that we are connecting from all over. I was born in Appomattox, a small town right here in Virginia, in 1953. In those times, everything was simpler, but also harder, you know? My father, Henry Miller, worked as a carpenter, making furniture that was true works of art. My dear mother, Ruth, took care of the house and sold quilts to supplement our income. It was with her that I learned to have a steady hand with needle and thread. We were a family of 6 siblings. I was the youngest of the girls. My 2 older brothers, Curtis and Roger, were almost men when I was still playing with dolls. They grew up strong like our father, working from an early age in the woodshop, learning the trade. Then came my sister Barbara, who was always the most studious, and Margaret, who had a beautiful voice and sang in the church choir. I, the youngest of the girls, grew up hearing everyone say I was just like Mom, both in my quiet way and in my skill with sewing stitches. Our house was small but cozy, built by Father himself. It was at the end of a dirt road, near a creek where we washed clothes and played on hot days. It had 3 tight bedrooms, one for the boys, one for the girls, and one for the parents. In the kitchen, the heart of the house, there was a wood-burning stove that kept everything warm during the rigorous winters of Appomattox. The smell of homemade bread and cornbread that my mother made still lives in my memory. It was a time of barefoot running on the grass, climbing trees to pick fruit, playing ring around the rosy with the neighbors until the sun went down. We didn't have much, but we never lacked the main thing: love and respect inside the home. From a young age, around 5 years old, I would sit beside my mother to learn the first stitches. While the other children ran around, I liked to watch her quilt, fascinated by the flowers and birds that were born from those magic hands. "Dorothy has magic hands," Grandma Sarah would say when she saw my first works. By 8 years old, I was already making small embroideries that my mother sold along with hers. The school was almost a half-hour walk away. We all went together, the older brothers looking after the younger ones. I remember my handwriting notebook, the multiplication tables I struggled with, and Mrs. Helen, the teacher who had a stern but fair way about her. I only studied until the 8th grade. Back then, for a girl from a humble family like ours, once you learned the basics, you were expected to stay home, help your mother, and prepare for marriage. On Sundays, the whole family went to church, women on one side, men on the other, and afterwards lunch at Grandma Sarah's house, which brought together all the cousins, aunts, and uncles. It was a festive day, complete with biscuits and gravy, those staples that were common in our region. Afterward, the men played cards, and the women sat in a circle talking, swapping recipes and telling stories. It was on one of these Sunday afternoons, when I was 12 years old, that I met Wayne's family. They had moved from the back country of West Virginia to Appomattox. His father, Mr. Walter, was a distant friend of my father and came to work with wood too. Wayne was 17 and already helping his father. I remember him looking at me and I was all embarrassed, hiding my face in my mother's apron. At that time, I didn't know that that shy young man, with brown eyes and calloused hands, would change my destiny forever. Nor did I suspect that years later he would be the father of my Sarah. But before that, a lot of water passed under the bridge. Life in Appomattox followed its own rhythm, marked by the seasons, the harvests, the religious festivals. The county fair was the most awaited event of the year. The town square filled with booths, there was square dancing, bonfires, and lots of good food. It was at one of these fairs, when I was 13, that I felt the first sign that I was no longer a child. My mother noticed before me when she saw a little spot of blood on my petticoat. She took me home quickly, explained to me about the rules, as they called it back then, and gave me a cloth I should use every month from then on. "Now you are a young lady, Dorothy. You have to be more careful with the boys," she said with that worried look. And so it went. Between sewing, prayers, and responsibilities, I grew up, leaving childhood behind little by little and entering that phase that would change everything. Time passed, and when I turned 17, Wayne was already 22 and working steadily in the woodshop with his father. We would meet at Sunday services, at church bazaars, and every now and then he would show up at the house, always with the excuse of talking to my brothers. But I knew, and everyone knew, he was coming to see me. Our courtship started like that, under the watchful eyes of the family. A respectful courtship, as was done in the old days. At 19, I got married. It was a simple but beautiful ceremony at the main church in Appomattox. My dress I sewed myself with the help of my mother and my sister Margaret. It was a satin fabric with small flowers embroidered on the bodice. Each little flower took hours of work, but the result was enchanting. We went to live in a small house that Wayne built with the help of my father and brothers. It was small, but to us it seemed like a palace. And I, full of dreams, set up a little corner with my sewing machine, a wedding gift from my parents. I started taking in sewing, doing adjustments and small repairs for the neighbors. In the beginning, Wayne was a good husband, hard-working, came home tired, but always with a smile on his face. Our first year of marriage was peaceful, full of adaptation and discovery. He left early to work in the woodshop, and I took care of the house, sewed, and gradually we built our life. At 21, I got pregnant with our little one. The pregnancy was smooth, despite the morning sickness that left me weak in the first months. Wayne was overjoyed when I told him, already planning to make the crib for the child himself. Our daughter was born on a winter morning in 1974, pink and with a head full of black hair that looked just like her father. "She will be named Sarah, like my grandmother," Wayne said, and I agreed. It was a beautiful name, delicate, just like her. The problem started when Sarah was about 2 years old. Mr. Walter's woodshop wasn't doing well. There was competition from a larger factory that opened in Lynchburg. Wayne started getting worried, tense. Sometimes he came home smelling of whiskey. It wasn't every day, but I started noticing it becoming more frequent. On those nights, I put Sarah to bed early and stayed in the kitchen sewing and praying for him to arrive in a good mood. When Sarah turned 3, the woodshop closed for good. Mr. Walter, already old, decided to return to West Virginia to live with another son, but we stayed in Appomattox. Wayne got a job at a lumber yard, earning less and working more, and that's when his transformation began. The gentleman I knew was disappearing, giving way to someone bitter. He complained about everything: the food, the house, my sewing, Sarah's crying. Any little thing was a reason to explode. In the beginning, it was just yelling. I sent Sarah to her room and endured it silently, waiting for the storm to pass. The first time he hit me was after a birthday party for the neighbor's son. We came home and he complained that I had been too friendly with Larry, an acquaintance of ours. "You were throwing yourself at him," he shouted, completely out of his mind. I tried to explain that we were just talking about a sewing job his wife wanted to commission me for, but Wayne didn't want to listen. The slap came out of nowhere, hard, making me stagger. I stood in shock, hand on my face, in disbelief. He had never raised a hand to me. That night, I cried hidden in the bathroom so Sarah wouldn't hear. The next day, Wayne woke up remorseful, begged for forgiveness, swore it would never happen again. And I believed him. Wanted to believe him. I told myself it was the whiskey talking, not my Wayne. "It wasn't him," I whispered to my reflection, trying to mask the bruises with powder. But deep down, I knew the man I married was fading. We learned to live walking on eggshells, holding our breath. Our home, once filled with laughter, became a prison of silence. I watched my little Sarah shrink into herself, becoming invisible to avoid his wrath, and my heart broke 1,000 times a day. I carried the weight of keeping the peace, unaware that I was slowly losing the war for our souls. When Sarah turned 5, Wayne lost his job at the lumber yard. He was unemployed for almost 3 months, drinking more and more. My sewing became the support of the house. I worked day and night at the machine, taking orders for clothes, repairs, curtains, whatever appeared. I had a loyal clientele, thank God, but money was tight. It was during this period that my brother Curtis, who had moved to Lynchburg years before, suggested we move there. "There's work at the paper mill too, Dorothy. Bring Wayne. You can stay at my house until you get settled." Wayne resisted at first. A man's pride didn't want to depend on his brother-in-law, but when the owner of the general store refused to sell us any more on credit, he gave in. We packed our bags, sold the little we had, and left for Lynchburg. In the first months in Lynchburg, we stayed at my brother Curtis and my sister-in-law Nancy's house. They welcomed us with open arms, especially Sarah, who became the joy of the house. Wayne got the job at the paper mill, and I continued sewing, now for a new clientele that Nancy introduced me to. Little by little, we saved up some money and rented a simple house, but it was ours. It was 1979. Sarah had just turned 5 and started attending kindergarten. Everything seemed like it was going to get better. Wayne was calmer with a new job, drank less, and even played with Sarah every now and then. I actually thought we had turned the page, that the bad days had stayed in Appomattox. My other brother, Roger, also ended up coming to Lynchburg the following year. With our father's health worsening, he wanted to stay closer to us. Roger was always the quietest, but the most observant too. From the start, I noticed he looked at Wayne with suspicion, as if seeing something I tried to hide. "This husband of yours doesn't smell right to me, Dorothy," he told me once when we were alone. "If he does anything to you or to the girl, you tell me." I felt awkward, changed the subject. Said Wayne had changed, that everything was fine now, but deep down those words gave me comfort. It was good to know my brothers were nearby, looking out for me and Sarah. The calm didn't last long. When Sarah was almost 8, Wayne was promoted to supervisor at the mill. He earned better, but the responsibility increased, and with it, the stress. He started coming home late, always tense. The fights returned, worse than before. He complained about the mess in the house, the food, the noise Sarah made when playing. Anything became a reason. It was around this time that I noticed the first change in Sarah. My little girl, always so happy and chatty, started becoming quiet, frightened. At school, the teacher called me worried because Sarah was distant, didn't participate in activities like before. At home, when she heard the sound of the key in the door announcing her father's arrival, she ran to her room like a frightened little animal hiding from a predator. One night I woke up with Sarah beside my bed, crying softly. "Can I sleep here, Mom?" she asked with a voice so small I could barely hear. Wayne, who was sleeping next to me, woke up irritated. "Go back to your room, girl. You're too big to be scared of the dark," he scolded. Sarah trembled but obeyed, going back to her room with dragging steps. The next morning, I discovered she had wet the bed, something that hadn't happened since she was very small. When I asked what was happening, if she had had a nightmare, she just lowered her head and said she didn't remember. But her eyes, my God, her eyes said something else. They were full of a fear no child should know. I started paying more attention. Sarah, who was always a clean girl, suddenly didn't want to take a shower anymore, complained of constant stomach aches, had nightmares almost every night. At school, the teacher reported she had moments where she seemed absent, as if her thoughts were very far from there. It was on a Sunday afternoon, when Wayne had gone out to play cards with colleagues from the mill, that I had the courage to ask Sarah directly. We were alone, sewing together. I had taught her the first stitches, just like my mother taught me. "Sarah," I started carefully, "did something happen that you want to tell me? Something that is making you sad?" She stayed silent for such a long time. I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, without raising her eyes from the embroidery, she murmured, "Dad gets mad at me at night." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean, honey? What happens at night?" She shrugged, still not looking at me. "He comes into my room when you're sleeping, says I did something wrong, that I need to learn to be a good girl." In that moment, I felt as if the floor had opened beneath my feet. Sarah's words kept hammering in my head for days. "He comes into my room when you're sleeping." I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep. I started paying attention to everything, the looks, the silences, the reactions. I observed how Sarah shrank her shoulders when her father approached, how her eyes lowered, how she seemed to want to disappear. One night I pretended to sleep earlier than usual. Wayne stayed in the living room watching television as usual. I lay there, motionless, barely breathing, ears attentive to every noise in the house. After a time that seemed like an eternity, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. They weren't steps towards our room, they were steps stopping at Sarah's bedroom door. I heard the soft click of the doorknob, the door opening, and then silence. My heart beat so fast I thought it would explode. I wanted to get up, run, scream, but something paralyzed me. Fear? Doubt? To this day I can't explain what kept me pinned to that bed. Maybe the foolish hope that I had misunderstood everything, that he was just checking if she was covered, as loving fathers do. How long did he stay in her room? Half an hour? An hour? It seemed like an eternity. When I heard her bedroom door open again, I closed my eyes tightly, pretending to sleep deeply. I felt the mattress sink with his weight lying down next to me. I smelled sweat, cigarettes, and felt disgust, a deep disgust that turned my stomach. Have you ever laid next to a stranger who wears the face of someone you once loved? It's a lonely, terrifying feeling. I lay there holding my breath, praying the morning sun would come faster, realizing that the monster in my nightmares was breathing right beside me. The next morning, I observed Sarah at breakfast. She was quieter than usual, with dark circles no child should have. When Wayne left for work, I approached her, trying to sound casual. "Did you sleep well, my daughter?" She just shrugged, eyes fixed on the bowl of oatmeal, almost untouched. "Sarah," I started with the gentlest voice I could find. "You can tell me anything, you know that, right? Mommy is here to protect you." For an instant, I saw a spark in her eyes, something like hope, but it soon went out. "There's nothing to tell, Mom." And she left the table, leaving breakfast half-eaten. The next day, I took Sarah to school and, instead of going home, I went straight to the payphone on the square. I called the school supply store, where my sister-in-law Nancy worked. "I need to talk to you," said my trembling voice. "It's urgent." We met at lunchtime, on a park bench. With a voice broken by sobs, I told my suspicions. Nancy listened to everything in silence, her face getting paler and paler. "Dorothy," she finally said, holding my hands in hers. "You need to be sure before making any accusations. But if it's true, my God, you need to get Sarah out of that house." "How am I going to be sure?" I asked desperately. "He always says I'm seeing things, that I'm paranoid." "And Sarah won't speak. She's scared." "Look for signs," Nancy said with a firmness that surprised me. "Marks on her body, torn or dirty clothes. Watch when she takes a bath." That afternoon I asked Sarah to take a bath earlier than usual. I went into the bathroom with her, saying I was going to wash her hair. It was something we did sometimes. It wouldn't seem strange. When she started to undress, I felt my blood freeze. There were purple marks on her thighs, finger marks, as if someone had held her forcefully, and on the back of her legs, small spots that looked like cigarette burns. Seeing those marks on little Sarah wasn't just a confirmation of abuse. It was the fuel Dorothy needed to burn down her own denial. If you've ever had to turn your pain into a plan, you know exactly what she's feeling right now, and she's about to take a massive risk. I have to pause for a second to take a sip of my tea, just remembering that sight makes my hands shake even now. It wasn't just burns on her skin. It felt like he had put that cigarette out right on my soul. If you are a mother watching this, you know that specific kind of pain it burns hotter than any fire, doesn't it? "Sarah," I whispered, trying to control the tremor in my voice. "How did you hurt your legs, honey?" She looked at her own legs, as if only at that moment noticing the marks. "I fell on the school stairs," she answered too quickly. "And these round marks look like burns?" She looked away. "I don't know. Maybe when I played near the stove." Lies. Desperate lies from a terrified child. My God, how did I not notice before? How could I be so blind? That night I couldn't pretend. When Wayne arrived, he noticed something different in my look. "What is it, woman? Look like you've seen a ghost." "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "About Sarah." He stiffened visibly. "What about her?" "She has marks on her body, injuries she can't explain." Wayne let out a forced laugh. Kids get hurt all the time. Dorothy falls, bumps into things. Sarah has always been clumsy. There are cigarette marks on her legs, I insisted, my voice going up an octave, and bruises on her thighs. His face changed. The mask of normality fell for an instant, revealing something dark, threatening. Are you accusing me of something? His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. I lost my courage. The fear I saw in my daughter's eyes was now in me. No, I'm just worried. He approached, grabbing my arm tightly. You're inventing things, Dorothy. You're paranoid. She falls, she bumps into things, that's all. Now, enough of this subject. That night was a torment. Lying next to him, I felt waves of disgust and fear washing over me. I prayed, asking God for strength and guidance, and slowly, a desperate plan began to form in my mind. The next day, with the excuse that I needed materials for a special sewing order, I went downtown. I entered an electronics store where weeks before I had seen a home video camera set up. It was bulky, complicated, and cost more money than I had seen in months. I touched my ears, feeling the cold metal of my mother's gold heirloom earrings, the only thing of value I had left in this world. I didn't hesitate. I walked into the pawn shop and traded my past to save my daughter's future. As I handed them over, I didn't feel loss. I felt the first surge of power. I was no longer just a victim. I was a woman with a plan. It's funny how giving up the only valuable thing I owned made me feel richer than I ever had. I traded gold for truth. If you've ever had to make a sacrifice to save someone you love, tell Grandma in the comments. Write sacrifice, so I know I'm surrounded by other warriors. The salesman showed me how to set it up. I went home with the heavy equipment hidden deep inside a large box of fabrics, praying Wayne wouldn't notice the new addition to my sewing supplies. You might be wondering, how on earth did a woman with empty pockets in the early 82nds hide such a bulky machine from a suspicious husband? Well, honey, desperation makes you cunning. I built a mountain of quilts and scraps around that lens so perfectly that even God would have had to squint to see it. When a mother is fighting for her cub, she becomes a master of disguise. I waited for the right moment when Wayne left for work and Sarah was at school. I went into her room and carefully positioned the camera on the top shelf of her closet, hidden behind a stack of quilts, with just the lens peeking through the slightly ajar door. The hardest part was the cable. I had to run it along the baseboard and under the rug, praying he wouldn't trip over it or spot the extra wire going into the VCR in the living room. I carefully covered the exposed sections in the hallway with fabric scraps, making it look like part of my usual sewing clutter. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Wayne came home tired and went to sleep early, or stayed watching television until late, but didn't go into Sarah's room. I started to think that maybe I really was getting paranoid. Maybe I had misinterpreted the signs, the injuries. On the 4th night, I woke up with a start. Something had woken me, a noise. A hunch. I reached out to Wayne's side of the bed. It was empty. I looked at the clock. 3 a.m. With my heart in my throat, I got up silently. Our bedroom door was ajar. In the hallway, I saw a sliver of light coming from Sarah's room. I approached, tiptoeing, trying not to make noise. The door was closed, but not completely. Through the gap, I could see part of the room. What I saw in that moment will forever be etched in my memory. Wayne was sitting on the edge of Sarah's bed. He had a cigarette in one hand and in the other. My God, I don't even want to remember. Sarah was lying down, motionless like a statue, eyes open staring at the ceiling, tears flowing silently down her face. I recoiled, horrified, covering my mouth with my hand not to scream. I went back to our room, shaking uncontrollably. I wanted to grab Sarah in my arms and run from that house at that exact moment, but I knew I needed proof. A woman's word against a man's back then, in that town. I needed something concrete. In the morning, I waited for Wayne to leave for work. Sarah had already gone to school, taken by him as usual. I retrieved the tape from the VCR where it had been recording silently all night. My hands trembled as I rewound it to watch the footage. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. I locked myself in the bathroom, my body shaking so violently I could barely stand. I threw up, purging the denial, the fear, and the weak woman I used to be. I cried until I was hollowed out, but in that emptiness, a cold, iron-hard resolve settled in. The Dorothy who was afraid of her husband died on that bathroom floor. Whatever fear she had is gone now, replaced by a mother's cold resolve to protect her cub. But having the evidence is one thing. Getting Sarah out safely before Wayne finds out is a dangerous game she can't afford to lose. The woman who stood up was a warrior. I looked in the mirror, wiped my mouth, and whispered, "Never again." I was broke, I was terrified, but for the first time I was dangerous. But what to do? Where to go? I didn't have enough saved money to start from scratch, and Wayne would find us. I was sure. I needed help. I picked up the phone and called my brother Roger. I didn't go into details, just said, "I need you and Curtis to come over to the house tonight. It's about Sarah, it's urgent." Roger noticed something in my voice. "Did something happen to the girl?" "When you arrive, I'll explain everything. Please, don't say anything to Wayne if you meet him. Say you want to surprise Sarah." Something like that. The day dragged on with agonizing slowness. I picked Sarah up from school earlier than usual. I invented that she had a doctor's appointment. Instead of going home, we went to Nancy's house. I told her what I had discovered, showed the recorded images. She cried with me, hugged me, and said Sarah could stay there as long as necessary. "But what are you going to do, Dorothy?" she asked worriedly. "I'm going to get justice," I answered with a voice that didn't even seem like mine. Justice the way it has to be done. I went back home alone, leaving Sarah safe with Nancy. I prepared dinner as if it were a normal day. I left the videotape ready next to the television and waited. Wayne arrived at 6 p.m., as always. Asked for Sarah. "She's at Aunt Nancy's house," I replied calmly. "Curtis and Roger are coming to have dinner with us tonight. I thought it best she stay there playing with her cousins." He seemed to relax. "Ah, your brothers are coming? Good. Been a while." At 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was them. Curtis, the oldest, always serious and responsible, and Roger, the youngest of the men, of few words but a penetrating gaze. They entered, greeted Wayne with formal handshakes. "Shall we have dinner first?" I asked, serving the food I had prepared. A dinner no one there really ate. The tension was palpable. Even Wayne, normally oblivious to subtleties, seemed to sense something was wrong. After dinner, with coffee cups on the table, I took a deep breath. "I have something to show you," I said, getting up and going to the television. Something I recorded. Wayne's face turned livid. "What have you been doing, Dorothy?" I didn't answer. I turned on the VCR, inserted the tape, and pressed play. The grainy black and white images began to pass on the screen, Sarah's room at night. The door opening, Wayne entering. I didn't need to show more than a few seconds. My brothers understood immediately. Curtis jumped up, face twisted with rage. Roger remained seated, but his expression had changed to something I had never seen before, a cold, calculating hatred. Wayne tried to run, knocking over his chair as he scrambled for the door, but Curtis was faster, blocking the exit with his broad shoulders. Roger finally stood up and calmly closed the living room curtains. "Dorothy," Curtis said, without taking his eyes off Wayne, "you better leave now. Go to Nancy's house, stay with Sarah." I grabbed my purse, where I had already put the original videotape and some important documents. At the door, I turned one last time. Wayne was cornered between my brothers, his face a mask of fear. For the first time since I met him, I saw in his eyes the same terror he had caused my daughter. "What are you going to do?" he asked, voice trembling. Roger answered with a frightening tranquility. "We're going to teach you what happens to men who hurt children." Now, I know folks nowadays might wonder why we didn't just wait for the law. But back then, in our parts, family justice sometimes moved faster than the police. My brothers weren't saints, but that night, looking at their backs, they were the closest thing to guardian angels I ever saw. Sometimes, you do what you have to do to protect your blood. I closed the door behind me, knowing that what would happen in that living room wasn't something I wanted to witness. On the street, the cold night air hit me like a slap. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of horror, relief, and a strange sensation of liberation. I walked to Nancy's house, where Sarah was sleeping, finally safe. That was the first night in a long time that I also managed to sleep without fear. At Nancy's house, sitting next to the bed where Sarah slept, I wondered what was happening in my house at that moment. A part of me wanted my brothers to make Wayne suffer every pain he had caused my daughter. Another part feared the consequences. What if they went too far? What if the police got involved? Sarah stirred in her sleep, little face frowned, as if she was having a nightmare. I stroked her hair gently not to wake her. "It's okay now," I whispered. "Mommy is here. No one is going to hurt you again." Nancy came into the room with a cup of tea. "You need to try to rest a little," she said, handing me the hot drink. "Tomorrow, there will be many decisions to make." I had barely taken 2 sips of tea when we heard knocks on the door. My heart raced. Was it the police or Wayne who had somehow escaped my brothers? Nancy went to answer. I heard muffled male voices, then steps approaching the room. It was Curtis and Roger. Their faces were somber, tense, clothes rumpled. Curtis's knuckles were red and swollen. "It's done," Curtis said simply, sitting heavily in the corner chair. "What did you?" I started, but Roger interrupted me. "Better you don't know details, Dorothy. I can only say he won't lay a finger on Sarah again, nor on you." A heavy silence fell over us. No one asked if Wayne was alive. No one wanted to know. "And now?" I asked finally. "What do we do?" Curtis sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "Tomorrow very early, we'll go get your things at the house. Just the bare minimum. You and Sarah can stay here with us as long as needed." And Roger and Curtis exchanged looks. It was Roger who answered. "He's leaving Lynchburg. We gave him that choice. Disappear and never come back. Or face not only justice, but the whole town when they know what he did." I didn't ask anything else. That night, lying on the makeshift mattress next to Sarah's bed, I cried silently. Not for Wayne. That one didn't deserve a single tear. I cried for the lost time, for the signs I ignored, for my daughter's suffering I couldn't prevent. The next morning, as promised, my brothers took me back to the house to get our things. There was no sign of Wayne, but the living room still held evidence of the previous night. A broken chair, stains on the rug I preferred not to examine closely. I took clothes, documents, some photos, none with Wayne, Sarah's favorite toys and my sewing machine, my livelihood. As we were leaving, I noticed the teddy bear on the shelf in Sarah's room. Even though it hadn't been part of my plan, seeing it there, innocent amidst the horror that had happened in that room, made my heart ache. I decided to take it. That teddy bear wasn't to blame for anything, and Sarah would need comfort. The following days were a blur of confusing emotions. Sarah seemed relieved not to see her father, but was still frightened, withdrawn. I took her to a doctor who confirmed what I already knew and didn't want to accept. The abuse had been systematic and lasted months. He recommended that Sarah talk to a psychologist, but back then, in a town like Lynchburg, those resources were scarce. A week later, I received a summons to appear at the police station. Someone in the neighborhood had heard the commotion that night and called the police. Nothing had been recorded at the time, but suspicions arose when Wayne didn't show up at the mill anymore. Sitting in front of the sheriff, a middle-aged man named Patrick with deep dark circles and an expression that oscillated between boredom and irritation, I felt fear. What if he didn't believe me? What if he blamed my brothers? What if he took Sarah from me? "Mrs. Miller," he started flipping through a notepad. "Your husband has been missing for a week. His colleagues at the mill said he didn't show up for work. Didn't say anything. The last time he was seen was entering your house last Wednesday night. Do you know where he is?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know, Sheriff. He left. Just like that. Out of the blue." I hesitated. I didn't want to lie, but I couldn't tell the whole truth either. We had a fight about our daughter. The sheriff raised his eyes from the notepad, suddenly more attentive. What kind of fight? It was at this moment that I made the hardest and bravest decision of my life. I opened my purse and took out the videotape I had kept. "Proof. This," I said, placing the tape on the table, "will explain everything." The sheriff looked at the tape, then at me, with a raised eyebrow. "What's on there?" "Proof that my husband, that he was abusing our daughter." I put a camera in her room. It's all recorded." The sheriff's expression changed. The boredom gave way to something darker, more intense. "Are you aware of the gravity of this accusation?" "I am. That's why I brought proof." He picked up the tape, turned it in his hands, thoughtful. Then he called another deputy and asked him to bring a VCR. Asked if I wanted to leave the room while they watched. I decided to stay. I had already seen enough of those images to know what they would see. 20 minutes later, the sheriff turned off the device, face pale. The other deputy left the room without saying a word, visibly disturbed. A heavy silence settled between us. "Mrs. Miller," the sheriff finally spoke, voice softer than before. "Where is your daughter now?" "With my sister-in-law, she is safe." He sat thoughtfully. "And your brothers, do they know about all this?" I felt a chill down my spine. "Yes, they helped me confront my husband when I found out. And what happened in this confrontation? It was the moment of truth. My brothers told him that if he didn't disappear from town, they would take this tape to the police and make everyone know what he did. He chose to leave." The sheriff stared at me for a long time, as if trying to read the truth in my eyes. I sustained the gaze, praying silently. Finally, he sighed. "I understand." He took the tape and put it in a desk drawer. "I'm going to open a case against your husband for child abuse." Handing over that tape was Dorothy's final act of bravery, trusting a system that doesn't always protect the innocent. It's a gamble, but it's the only way to ensure he never hurts another child again. Stay tuned to see how she rebuilds from the ashes. I'm going to issue a search and arrest warrant. If he is found, he will have to answer for his crimes. I felt a huge weight lifting off my shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff." He raised his hand, interrupting my thanks. "Don't thank me yet. This is going to be difficult for you, and especially for your daughter. You will have to testify, undergo exams, and even with this evidence, he indicated the drawer where he had kept the tape. It's not guaranteed he will be convicted. The system doesn't always work as it should, especially in cases like this." I left the police station with mixed feelings. On one hand, relieved for having made the formal complaint, for having handed over the evidence. On the other, terrified with the possibility of Wayne returning, of having to face him in court, of exposing Sarah to more trauma. In the weeks that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. At every noise on the street, every knock on the door, my heart raced. Sarah had nightmares almost every night, woke up screaming, calling for me. We slept together, clinging to each other, like castaways in a storm. The news spread through the neighborhood inevitably. People whispered when we passed, looked with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Some avoided greeting us, as if what had happened was contagious. Others, especially women, came to offer support, bring food, ask if we needed anything. One day, about a month after the complaint, I received a call from the police station. They had found Wayne's car abandoned near the border with West Virginia. Inside it a letter, a confession, and a goodbye. He wouldn't come back. The sheriff told me they would continue looking, that the confession was practically an admission of guilt. But without him present, the case would technically remain open. "But you can rest assured," he added, "by the content of the letter. He doesn't intend to return." That night, I had a strange dream. I was in an open field, holding Sarah by the hand. Around us, flowers grew, not common flowers, but flowers made of colorful fabric, like the ones I embroidered. The wind swayed them gently, creating a rippling sea of colors, and, on the horizon, a rising sun, bright, promising. I woke up with a different feeling in my chest. It wasn't just fear or pain anymore, it was something new, something I had forgotten how it felt, hope. I looked at Sarah sleeping beside me, little face finally relaxed, at peace. I made a silent promise to her and to myself. We would rebuild our lives, find joy again, overcome this together. That same morning, I made 2 important decisions. First, I accepted the doctor's suggestion and sought a psychologist for Sarah. I was lucky. A young psychologist, Dr. Alice, had just moved to Lynchburg and was seeing patients at affordable rates at the local parish. The second decision was more practical. I rented a small room downtown to set up my own sewing studio. It wouldn't be easy to start over, But I had my skills, my determination, and now a new purpose. Ensure that Sarah had a safe, happy, and full life. The road would be long, I knew. Emotional wounds would take time to heal, perhaps more than physical ones. But for the first time in a long while, I could see a future beyond the pain. The following months were a period of reconstruction, slow and painful, but constant. Starting from zero is never easy, even more so carrying such deep scars. But I was determined to create a new life for me and Sarah, a life without fear. The sewing studio I rented was small, a cubicle with a narrow window on Main Street in downtown Lynchburg. It had space only for my sewing machine, a small table to cut fabrics, an old mannequin I bought second-hand, and some chairs for clients. But for me, that little space represented independence, a fresh start. In the beginning, orders were few. I didn't have much money to invest in fabrics or materials, so I worked mainly with repairs and adjustments. Nancy helped me a lot, spreading the word about my work among her friends. "Dorothy is the best seamstress I know," she told everyone. And gradually the clientele increased. Sarah continued living with us at Curtis and Nancy's house. I wanted to save as much as possible so we could have our own home again, a place just ours, without bad memories. My brothers insisted there was no rush, that we could stay with them as long as necessary, but I knew we needed our own space to truly rebuild our lives. The sessions with the psychologist Dr. Alice were helping Sarah. In the beginning, she barely spoke, just drew somber scenes, scary figures, houses with locked doors. But with time, the drawings started getting more colorful and she began to open up. Dr. Alice guided me on how to act, what to say, how to help my daughter process the trauma without reliving it. "You did everything right, Mrs. Miller," Dr. Alice told me once. "You believed in your daughter, acted to protect her, sought help. Many mothers, unfortunately, deny or ignore the signs." Her words comforted me, but didn't erase the guilt I felt for not having noticed sooner, for not having acted faster. This guilt would accompany me for many years, even knowing rationally that I had done the best I could in the circumstances we had. One day, about 6 months after Wayne's disappearance, I received an unexpected visit at the studio. It was Linda, a lady I knew only by sight, mother of a schoolmate of Sarah's. She entered timidly, looking around as if she feared being seen there. "Mrs. Miller," she started hesitantly. "Sorry to come like this without warning, but I really needed to talk to you." I offered a chair and she sat, hands restless in her lap. She seemed nervous, anxious. I learned. Well, the whole town learned what happened to your daughter. And I came because I need your help. I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "My Emily, my daughter. I think she too." Her voice failed, and tears began to roll down her wrinkled face, the same signs you described to the police, the fear, the nightmares, not wanting to be alone with her father. I felt a shiver run down my spine, that familiar terror, that feeling of helplessness in the face of evil. But this time I wasn't paralyzed by fear. This time I knew what to do. I took Linda's trembling hands in mine. "I'm going to help you. Let's go to the police station together." The same sheriff who handled my case. He will believe us. That same afternoon, I accompanied Linda to the police station. Sheriff Patrick received us, listened to her account attentively, and immediately initiated an investigation. 3 days later, Linda's husband was arrested. There were other victims besides his own daughter. We found out later. A monster who hid behind a respectable facade, just like Wayne. In the months that followed, other mothers came looking for me. Some just to talk, to understand how I had noticed the signs, to know how Sarah was recovering. Others, unfortunately, because they suspected their own children were being victims of abuse. For each of them, I offered the same support that Nancy and Dr. Alice had offered me. Listening, understanding, and practical help to seek justice and protection. A year after Wayne's escape, I managed to save enough money to make a down payment on a simple little house in the Rivermont neighborhood on the outskirts of Lynchburg. It was small, needing repairs, but it was ours. Sarah, who was almost 10, helped choose the colors to paint the walls. She chose yellow for the kitchen, light blue for her room, and soft green for the living room. Cheerful colors, colors of hope. On moving day, Curtis, Roger, and their friends from the mill helped transport the few pieces of furniture we had. Nancy organized a lunch for everyone in the backyard of the new house. It was a small celebration, not just of the house, but of our new life, of our survival. It was on this day, too, that I made a decision that would change the course of our lives. Sitting on the porch of our new house, watching Sarah play with Nancy's daughters in the yard, without fear, smiling like a child should smile, I realized we needed to do more than just survive. I'm going to create a support group, I announced during coffee, after lunch. For women and children who went through what we went through, a safe place to talk, to get stronger, to seek help. My brothers looked at each other worried. "Are you sure, Dorothy?" Curtis asked. "This will make you relive everything again." "Maybe. I already relive everything anyway," I answered. "At least this way, these memories will serve to help other people. They say the best revenge is a life well lived, but Dorothy went a step further. She chose a life that heals. Turning her own scars into a map for others to find their way out is the ultimate victory over the darkness. If seeing this circle of strength grow warms your heart, let us know in the comments. Her legacy is just getting started. And thus was born the Circle of Hope, which started with weekly meetings in my living room. In the beginning, it was just 5 women, including me and Linda. We met on Wednesday nights, after the children were in bed. We drank tea, ate muffins, and talked about our experiences, our fears, our small and big victories. With time, the group grew. Dr. Alice offered to participate as a volunteer, bringing her professional expertise. The local church gave us a larger room for meetings when my house could no longer hold all the participants. A lawyer from the city started offering free legal guidance to women who wanted to report their abusers. I discovered there was a strength in me I didn't know, a capacity to transform pain into action, fear into determination. Every time I helped another woman leave an abusive situation, every time I saw a child start to recover, I felt I was rebuilding not only my life, but contributing to a slightly better world. Sarah also found her own form of healing. At school, a teacher noticed her talent for writing and encouraged her to participate in literary contests. At 12, she won her first prize with an essay on courage. When I asked her what inspired her, she answered simply, "You, Mom." We never had concrete news of Wayne again. There were rumors from time to time. Someone who saw him in Kentucky, another who swore to have met him in Tennessee, but nothing confirmed. Deep down, it didn't matter. He had lost power over us. Our lives were no longer defined by him, by what he did, by the fear he caused. Our sewing studio prospered in the following years. I started giving cutting and sewing classes to women from the Circle of Hope as a way to help them achieve financial independence. Many of them came from situations where they were completely dependent on their abusers, women who often lacked professional qualifications or the means to support themselves alone. Seeing them transform, strengthen themselves, and rebuild their lives was a joy I cannot describe in words. And Sarah, my brave, resilient girl, grew up to become a strong and determined woman who never allowed trauma to define her. The path wasn't easy. There were difficult moments, relapses, nights of nightmares, and days of deep sadness. But together, step by step, we built a life worth living. Today, at my 72 years, life has a sweetness I never imagined I would know. I continue here in Lynchburg, in the same little house in the Rivermont neighborhood, which over the years was improved, painted, expanded. The backyard, which used to be just dirt, is now full of colorful flowers, aromatic herbs, and even some vegetables I cultivate with care. My neighbors always stop by to grab some mint for tea or a bit of rosemary to season the meat. My sewing studio, which started so small, grew and transformed. Today it operates in the front part of the house, where I built an extension with the help of my nephews. I don't work as many hours as before. Age takes its toll on eyesight and joints, but I still do some special jobs for old clients who won't accept another seamstress. Most of the time in the studio now is dedicated to teaching. Twice a week, I give sewing classes to women referred by the Women's Resource Center, which works in partnership with our Circle of Hope. Seeing these women, many of them leaving situations of violence, finding financial independence, and recovering self-esteem through manual work, fills me with indescribable joy. The circle of hope that started in that little room of my house so many years ago. Today is a recognized organization in the city. We have our own headquarters, volunteers, partnerships with the City Hall and national NGOs. I make a point of participating in all meetings, even if now my role is more of a mentor than a coordinator. The younger women took over leadership, bringing new ideas, new approaches, keeping the work alive and relevant. Sarah, my dear daughter, today is a 51-year-old woman. She graduated in psychology, inspired by Dr. Alice, who helped us so much, and works attending to children and adolescents victims of violence. She has a special way with the little ones, manages to make them feel safe, understood, respected. I think her own experience, even though painful, gave her this gift of connecting with others suffering without letting herself be beaten down by it. She married a math teacher, Timothy, a kind and patient man she met in college. I have 2 wonderful grandchildren, Chloe, 25, who followed in her mother's footsteps and is also graduating in psychology, and Mason, 22, who studies civil engineering in Richmond. He comes to visit me on holidays and always makes a point of spending at least a whole day with me in the studio, helping me organize fabrics, listening to my stories from the old days. My brothers, Curtis and Roger, already elderly like me, are still around. Curtis lost Nancy to cancer 5 years ago, a loss that shook us deeply. She was a warrior until the end, and her absence is still felt in every family gathering, on every special date. Roger never married, was always the most solitary of the 3, but has a special connection with the great nieces and nephews who adore him. Mornings are my favorite moment of the day. I wake up early with the first ray of Sunday, prepare my coffee, sit on the porch, and watch the street awaken slowly. Children going to school, workers to their factories and offices, the mailman making his rounds, life in its normal, safe, predictable rhythm, a blessing I learned not to take for granted. In the afternoons, when I'm not teaching at the studio, I like to receive visitors. Former students bring their children to meet me, calling me Grandma Dorothy, even without us having blood ties. Ladies from the Circle of Hope come to drink tea, discuss community problems, ask for advice. I have a rocking chair on the porch where I sit to talk, and a basket always full of corn muffins, cheese biscuits, or cookies. Old recipes of my mother that I still make with pleasure. Once a month, usually on the last Sunday, the whole family gathers here at home for lunch. Sarah and Timothy, the grandkids when they can come, my brothers, nephews, sometimes even some close friends. The house gets full, noisy, alive. I make a point of cooking myself with help from Sarah and the girls. I prepare dishes everyone loves, pot roast, mashed potatoes, fried chicken, and the dessert that can never be missing, the peach cobbler, which was my mother's favorite. During these lunches, I look around and feel a deep gratitude. Not for what I went through. I will never thank suffering, but for the strength I discovered in me, for the family we built, for the peace we conquered. I think of all the women we helped over the years, the children who were protected because their mothers found courage to report, to leave, to start over. Sometimes, very rarely, I still have news about Wayne. Years ago, we heard he had died in a car accident somewhere in Tennessee. I didn't feel joy with the news, nor even relief. I realized he no longer had power over my thoughts, over my emotions. He was just a distant shadow of a past that, although it left scars, doesn't define who we are. At night, before sleeping, I have the habit of reading a little. I like poetry, historical romances, biographies of strong women. On the bedside table, I keep a notebook where Sarah wrote her first stories, those that started as a form of therapy and revealed her talent. Sometimes I reread these childish texts, recognizing in them the first signs of the extraordinary woman my daughter would become. And so I live my days in peace with my past, grateful for my present, hopeful about the future. Not just my future, which at this stage of life has already become shorter than the path traveled, but the future of women and children who will continue the work we started, who will carry forward the message that it is possible to survive, overcome, and even bloom after the storm. As they say around here in Virginia, after the storm comes the calm. And what a beautiful, calm life reserved for me. My dears, reaching the end of this conversation of ours, I want to leave some words that come from the bottom of my heart. Words that cost a lot of time and many tears for me to learn. If you are going through a situation similar to the one I lived or know someone who is, I want you to know you are not alone. Silence is abuse's greatest ally. It was by breaking this silence that I found my liberation, and it was helping other women break theirs that I found my purpose. I learned that fear can paralyze us, but it can also propel us to act when something even more precious is at risk. When I saw those marks on my Sarah's body, the fear I felt of losing my daughter was greater than the fear I had of my husband. And it was this reversal that gave me courage to act. Believe in your instincts. We mothers have an intuition that rarely fails. If something seems wrong, it probably is. I ignored the first signs because it was more comfortable not to see, because I didn't want to face the terrible truth. But every day of denial was one more day of suffering for my daughter. I understood with time that I am not responsible for the actions of others, only for mine. I carried for years the guilt of not having realized sooner what was happening to Sarah. But the true guilt was never mine, nor could it be. The responsibility for the abuse lies solely and exclusively with the abuser. Life has a funny way of showing us our own strength. Before that fateful night, I saw myself as a weak, submissive woman, incapable of great acts. It was precisely when everything fell apart that I discovered the fortress that existed inside me. As that saying goes, it's in the fall that we learn to fly. And we all fall sometimes, don't we, my dears? But look at me now, sitting in this garden. If an old woman like me can find peace after such a storm, so can you. Never forget that your broken pieces are just waiting to be put back together into a beautiful mosaic. The healing process isn't linear. There are good days and bad days, moments of progress and moments of relapse. Both for me and for Sarah, recovery was a road full of curves and obstacles. But every small victory, every nightmare less, every genuine smile was proof that we were heading in the right direction. I learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Alone, I would never have managed to protect Sarah and rebuild our lives. I needed the strength of my brothers, the support of Nancy, the professional guidance of Dr. Alice, the understanding of Sheriff Patrick, and later the collective strength of our circle of hope. Hands that reach out to help are blessings we shouldn't refuse out of pride. Pain can turn into purpose. What we lived was terrible, but it wasn't in vain. Every woman I helped get out of an abusive situation, every child who was protected because their mother found courage to act, every family rebuilt on healthier foundations, all of this gave meaning to our suffering. Not that it justifies it, never, but at least it doesn't let it have been in vain. And, perhaps the most important lesson, abuse does not define who we are. For a long time, I was the woman whose husband abused their daughter. Sarah was the girl abused by her father. These invisible labels accompanied us, shaping how others saw us and, worse, how we saw ourselves. Breaking these definitions, claiming our identities beyond the trauma, was a fundamental part of our healing. If you are in a violent situation, remember, there is a way out. It may seem impossible now. It may seem like you are alone, that no one will believe you, that there is nowhere to go. But I was in that same place of despair, and I can guarantee you there is a way. There are people willing to help. There is a life waiting for you on the other side of fear. In every city in the USA, there are protection services for women and children. Seek help, even if it's just an anonymous call to understand your options. A first step, even small, can open the path to your liberation. And to you watching, who fortunately never went through a situation like this, I ask you, please be attentive to the signs. A neighbor with inexplicable marks, a child who suddenly changed behavior, a friend who always seems scared. Sometimes, a word of support, an attentive ear, can be what that person needs to find courage. I found my purpose in helping other women get out of the darkness that one day swallowed me. I found my peace in seeing my daughter bloom, despite everything. I found my joy in the simplicity of ordinary days, without fear, without secrets. And now, before I say goodbye, I want to tell you, if you are walking through your own storm, I want you to know that you are not alone. We are here. If my story gave you a little strength today, please consider subscribing and joining this family. Let's remind each other that we are bigger than our pain, And to show that you've completed this journey with me, please leave a comment with a single word, survivor. It's a word that belongs to all of us who choose to heal. Thank you for spending your time with me. May you be blessed, and may you be safe.